us. We do this stuff. Well, welcome to Friday afternoon at the Manor. My name is John Joseph Mastandrea, and this is a very special day. She doesn't know this, but I'm saying it's very special. Thank you to Nina DeCina, she's been our executive producer for over 2 years with our Friday afternoon program. Come over here. A little gift from the congregation, cookies, and a gift certificate to Jules. Thank you, Nina.
Oh my God, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Nina's been amazing. So and then we're over to Susan Johnson. There you go.
Welcome, everybody. We're happy to welcome Christine Nayler, who is from Mom Stop the Harm, which is a group that deals with substance abuse, harm resulting from that, and deaths from it. And so we're definitely looking forward to hearing about that. Christine?
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen now with you. Sorry, just give me one moment. Okay. It is an honor and a privilege for me to be here today speaking to you about this important topic. My name is Christine Nayler, and I am a member of Burden Avenue United Church in Barrie, where I serve on our church's outreach committee. I'm active in my faith community in Barrie, participating in church partnerships and discussions related to issues affecting our community. I'm a vocal advocate for safe supply, decriminalization, mental health supports, and supportive housing. I am the co-founder and director of Ryan's Hope, and I am an advocate for Mom Stop the Harm. Mom Stop the Harm is a network of Canadian mothers and families who have lost loved ones, whose loved ones have died due to substance misuse. Our network calls for an end to the failed war on drugs. I'm going to stop sharing. Sorry. I'm just going to try not to share my screen now. I'm here today to share a family story. It's a story of love and grief, of pain, purpose, loss, and survival. I just want to show you a picture of our family. Oh, sorry. I'm not so great with this. This is our family. As you can see up front, that is my boy, Ryan. That's who he was, a fighter. He was an activist and an advocate. Up until his last breath, Ryan fought his best to stay alive. He was one of the many lives we have lost due to our country's failed war on drugs. Sorry. Did you know that we lose 20 Canadians a day to toxic drugs? That number should shock and stagger people, and yet often it doesn't. That's because people have grown numb to hearing statistics. They hear numbers and they just think those are numbers, forgetting that those were actual people that we lost, and each loss affects a family and a community. These human lives were valuable and they mattered. These deaths were preventable, and yet our organization, our government refuses to take the necessary action to stop these preventable deaths. If we were losing this number of Canadians to any other issue, be it there would be action, but shame, stigma, ignorance, and moral judgment cause our government to place less value on these lives than, say, lives lost to COVID or cancer or heart disease. I'm here today standing before you and sharing my story of pain and grief in the hopes of opening hearts and minds, in the hopes of shattering some of that stigma. I'm here today to appeal to my fellow Christians to do what we are called to do as followers of Jesus, to look into our hearts, to ask ourselves and our elected leaders tough questions, to challenge and to shake up broken systems that cause undue and unjust harms to our most vulnerable citizens. On my hard days, I will often ask myself, if he were here today, what would Jesus do? And as a Christian, the answer that always comes to me is he would be flipping tables. Jesus wasn't afraid to speak the truth, to shake things up and to challenge the system. He wasn't afraid to the consequences to himself. He knew what his duty was and his responsibility, and he accepted it. As a follower of Jesus, I believe that I have a duty and a responsibility to be a truth teller too. And so I refuse to let shame and stigma keep me silent. And so here I am today to share with you my family story. I also just want to share this photo with you. This photo is of some of the lives we have lost. To date, we have lost over 27,000 Canadians to our failed drug laws and policies.
Excuse me, Christine?
Oh, yes.
I think you're not sharing.
Okay, sorry. Let me.
Sorry.
Yeah.
You're right.
Okay.
Yeah. Perfect. Now it's sharing. Good.
Okay. Can you see it?
Yes, Roger that.
Okay. So this picture, this is some of the children of some of our Ontario Moms Stop the Harm advocates. You'll see up at the top center, the one with the person holding the cat, that's my Ryan. This photo is so precious to me because it captures who my Ryan was. This photo was taken at the cat shelter where Ryan and I volunteered together. We volunteered there during a time when Ryan was ill and was really struggling with suicidal thoughts and depression. Getting out of bed was hard for him, as was making it through the day without harming himself. And yet, despite all of this, he was always ready to go and do his duty at the shelter, and he never missed a scheduled shift. I'd like to introduce you now to my Ryan. This is my Ryan. From the youngest age, Ryan wanted to make a difference in the world. He was always trying to do whatever he could to help others, and he would share everything he had with his family, his friends, and even strangers. He'd empty our cupboards to fill the paper bag that comes in the newspaper at Thanksgiving, or empty his piggy bank every time we went to Toronto so he would have money to give the homeless. He was a born advocate and activist. He wrote his first protest letter at 10 years old, and it was read at Queen's Park. He was an ethical vegan and a passionate animal rights activist. When Ryan was living in Toronto working on his master's degree, he heard about the University of Victoria's plan to cull over 1,000 rabbits. He used his savings and immediately flew across the country to save the bunnies. He helped organize a campaign that included letters, writing, petitions, radio and TV interviews. Thanks to Ryan and the other advocates' efforts, they were successful in relocating all the rabbits to new homes across Canada and the US. That was one of his proudest accomplishments. My boy was an old soul. He was so wise beyond his years, and yet he kept his youthful leprechaun spirit and remained forever young. He was so proud of his Irish heritage, so much so that he earned a degree in Celtic studies. Ryan was an avid reader and writer. From babyhood onward, he was in love with literature. He loved libraries and believed in the power of reading. He earned a master's degree in information and library sciences, and he loved working as a librarian at the rare book collection at the University of Toronto. Ryan loved to sing, and when he sang his heart out. When he was growing up, we used to have family karaoke nights, and Ryan would always steal the show. My fondest memories of those nights were when we would do our country music duets together. The first sign of his illness happened when Ryan was living alone in Edmonton. This is where he started to experience psychosis. Ryan didn't know what was happening to him, and to cope with what was going on in his mind, he began to self-medicate. At first with alcohol, and then with street drugs, as the pharmaceutical medications did not work for him. After a suicide attempt, my husband flew to Edmonton to bring Ryan home. Naively, we thought that once he was home, we would be able to get him the help he needed. But this was only the beginning of an 8-year journey trying to get Ryan help, but only finding ourselves over and over again coming face to face with stigma and judgment from the people and systems that were supposed to be there to help him. Ryan struggled and fought his best to stay strong and stay alive, despite having odds double stacked against him, having to live with both bipolar disorder and substance use disorder. Life was hard the last years, but there were still many times of joy. Ryan was happiest when he was at family gatherings where he would be having intellectual debates with the adults or playing and goofing around with his nieces and nephews. I really do think the role he was most proud of was favorite uncle. He remained everyone's favorite uncle because of his youthful spirit, and he wasn't afraid to be silly. Even though he struggled so hard those last years, it didn't stop Ryan from caring about others and wanting to make a difference. He couldn't say no to anybody that needed help. Through his own struggle to stay alive, his heart remained open, and he was there when anyone needed them. He would listen on the phone for hours to friends that would call him. He understood that everyone was trying to do the best they could to get by, and he wouldn't judge anybody. I used to get mad at him and say to him, Ryan, you're not a homeless shelter, because no matter where he was living, whether it was a 2-bedroom apartment, a bachelor, or even a room, if somebody needed a place to stay, they knew that Ryan would take them in, no matter the consequences to himself. Amid his struggles, he continued to advocate and bring awareness to issues that other people wanted to remain blind to. Issues regarding mental illness and addiction, poverty, and homelessness. He advocated for changes such as police accountability, increased funding for mental health, and decriminalization of drugs and safe supply. After he passed, I had someone reach out to me that had read a story about Ryan. She said she wanted to reach out to me because she wanted me to know she would never forget Ryan or his kindness. She said that they had met on the mental health ward of the hospital where they were both patients. Ryan was there after a suicide attempt. She shared with me how Ryan was always doing whatever he could to lift the spirits of the other patients, and how he had used his gift as a writer to write a personalized poem for every patient there. Though he was struggling to stay alive, he was thinking about others and doing what he could to help them. I had another friend of his reach out to me to tell me she wanted me to know that Ryan would always be missed and remembered for who he was, because there was now a huge loss in our community, because their safe harbor was gone. That's what Ryan was, she said. That's what his house was to the community, a safe harbor. Those that were ignorant could look at Ryan's house and call it a drug house, she said, but no, that wasn't true at all. Most of the time, they didn't even have any drugs. There was only friendship and safety and belonging. That was the gift that Ryan gave them, a place that they could all come to and feel like they were welcomed and safe and belong. After Ryan passed, my husband and I were dealing with our grief, and we knew that we wanted to do something to honor Ryan and who he was as a person. Thus, Ryan's Hope was born. Ryan's Hope is an organization we started in memory and honor of our son, with the mission to advocate and support people living with mental illness, substance use issues, and experiencing homelessness. Our goal is to build community and connection, and to give these people confidence and a sense of purpose. I'm still so angry. I'm angry at the world. I'm angry at our government, angry at all the outdated policies and politics that made it impossible for Ryan to get the help he so desperately needed. I feel so let down by systems that failed him. And that's why I stand before groups like yours over and over again, putting our family trauma out there, facing judgment and stigma. It's hard and it hurts. And every time I do a talk, it takes so much out of me, and it takes me time to recover. But I refuse to be silenced when people are dying. I couldn't advocate the way I do now when Ryan was alive, because when he was here, my whole focus was on keeping him safe and keeping him alive. This is why moms such as me who have lost our children advocate for changes, because mothers of children that are alive now and struggling are doing all they can to just hold their children above water. We need to go upstream and deal with why they are falling in, why a whole generation of Canadians is drowning. We can't do it without you. The church has a voice, and the church has a power to bring about change. And so I'm calling on you, my fellow Christians, to come upstream with us, to speak to your neighbors, to speak to your spouses, your children, your MPs, to demand changes to laws that aren't working, that have already cost too many lives. What our country needs now is courage. We need a compassionate, health-based approach to this crisis, one that is rooted in love and science. There is no room or time for judgment anymore. We cannot pick or choose which drugs we will socially approve of and which we will cast a moral judgment on for those that use them. The criminalization of people who use drugs only hurts those that are already hurting. The cost of criminalization is too high, both in lives lost and in dollars spent. Dollars that have been spent on incarceration, on court, on policing would go much further if they were directed to prevention and treatment, to mental health supports, to recovery, and to safe supply. We need to call on our government to treat the toxic health crisis as what it is, a public health emergency, and then for them to act accordingly. So I just want to share this slide with you. Again, let me see. Sorry, technical issues.
We know all those.
Okay, I don't know. Trying to share it. It's not sharing. So anyways, I just wanted to say, if you are called to action, I invite you to visit our website, Mom Stop the Harm, for more information about what you can do and how you can help. Also, my email address, I will leave with Nina. I'm open to talking to anybody that wants to know more about this crisis and what they can do to advocate for and help. If you have been affected by this crisis, if you've lost a loved one, or if you have a loved one that is struggling with similar issues, we are here to help and to support. I want you to know you're not alone. This is an open invitation for you to reach out either to me or to Mom Stop the Harm. I really would like to thank you for being here today, for being willing to learn and to listen. I applaud your openness, and I leave you with this quote to think about. When our grandchildren ask us where we were when the voiceless and the vulnerable in our era needed leaders of compassion and purpose, I hope we can say that we showed up, and that we showed up on time. That's a quote by Gary Haugen. And so for Moms Stop the Harm, what we advocate for, what we do is we advocate for a safe supply, a safe regulated supply. We advocate for decriminalization of people who use drugs. We advocate for access to harm reduction and evidence-based treatment and upstream prevention. And now, if anybody has any questions.
Hello, Christine. That was very powerful and very moving. Thank you for being willing to share. I think that's so very important. Now, when you think of how we can make a difference right now, and I mean, you talked about call to the churches, but I'm assuming you've probably spoken to multi-faith contexts as well.
Yes.
Yeah, I would assume that, definitely. Okay. And certainly to schools. And now, where do you think that? Do you think if we had opportunities like these types of forums at schools, do you think that would help? Like high schools?
I think it absolutely would help, and I think it is very, very important to have those conversations at the schools because we're losing a whole generation of Canadians. We do know that children do experiment, in their teens and that at parties, and that they experiment with drugs. The drugs that are out there now are deadly, and a lot of people like to ignore the toxic drug crisis because they think that they're immune to it. They think, oh, well, we don't have anybody in our family that has a problem with drugs, or this can't affect us. There's still that judgment and stigma against it, that it only, affects certain type of population. And so that's why I feel it's really important for us to share our stories, our personal stories, to humanize it and to let people know that, my son was just like yours, and it could happen to anybody. And not everybody that uses drugs has a substance use issue. Some people use drugs recreationally, like people use, alcohol. And the drugs out there are very dangerous. And so we need to be having open conversations with our children so that they can know. And talking about it is going to save lives, right? It's not, I think that everyone should be carrying naloxone. Harm reduction is key. And a naloxone kit is something that's easy for anyone to get. You can go to a drugstore and you can ask for a naloxone kit and you can get it free. And you never know when somebody may need it and you could save a life.
Very important. Now, Susan Johnson, do you have a question?
I do actually. You mentioned laws that aren't working. Are there any in particular?
Well, the criminalization. So people use drugs to cope with life stresses. People use drugs to cope with illnesses, either physical pain, mental illness, trauma, all different reasons. We have legalized some drugs, and some drugs are not just socially acceptable, but if you don't use them, you're almost like an outcast, such as alcohol. Our government took a big step and legalized cannabis several years ago. So we're casting a moral judgment on certain drugs and saying, it's okay if you use this drug, you have a right to a safe supply. But if you use this drug, you're a criminal. And so we are criminalizing people just because of the drug of choice, the drug that works for them. So my son, he was on all kinds of pharmaceutical medications for his bipolar disorder and his psychosis. And none of those drugs worked for him. The pharmaceutical drugs did not work for him. There was only two that did. One that really worked for his, mental illness, but he could not stay on that drug because one of the physical side effects was that it was killing his white blood cells. And unfortunately, he had to be taken off that drug. And so he found a drug that worked for him. I like to say that it was his medication, but he was denied access to a safe supply of it. And because of that, he is dead. My son did not use opioids. He used stimulants. So his drug of choice was methamphetamines. And still he died of an opiate poisoning because the whole drug supply is now contaminated. So if we want to save lives, we need to have a safe, regulated supply of all drugs for people, because that's the only thing that's going to save them. We're losing 20 Canadians a day. In Ontario, we lose 8 people in our province each day to toxic drugs.
Mm-hmm. So making it, through physicians, giving them more options of what they could potentially prescribe. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, for sure. And one of the things is that physicians are afraid to prescribe drugs because one of the things that they thought that they were doing to try to crack down on the toxic drug, the opioid crisis, which it used to be called, but now we call it the toxic drug crisis because the whole supply is now toxic. It's not just the opioids that people are dying from, but they tried to make it harder for people to get the drugs, even through their doctors. And so doctors are reluctant to prescribe because, they have to answer for what they're prescribing and how much and everything like that. So we need to start treating it as a health issue rather than a criminal issue, which is how our current laws are set up to treat it as a criminal issue.
Now, Susan Logie's also on. Susan, do you have a question? I guess not. Okay, no.
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Multitasking here. My question is, when you've been advocating MPs and what have you, how successful has that been?
So actually, I love to say that it has been successful. There have been some MPs that get it, and they're ridings and where they serve their communities have been greatly affected by it, and they are advocating for changes too. I just returned from a trip to Ottawa where myself and another group of mothers went. There was a private members bill put forward by NDP MP Gord Johns from BC, and it was calling on a national health-based approach to address the toxic drug crisis, which included decriminalization. And it included expungement of records for people that had previously been charged with drug possession, and for safe supply, as well as more funding for mental health and recovery and treatment. And unfortunately, we had high hopes going to Ottawa. The bill was defeated. 248 MPs voted no, and 71 voted yes. So the whole Conservative Party voted no to this bill, and the majority of the Liberals did. And that was really, really disappointing because the Liberal government did their own study and their own task force, which this bill was based on the findings of that health bill. And the bill wasn't even to make it into law. The bill was to send it to the vote was to send it to the Standing Committee on Health, so that they could have debates, so that they could hear from experts, and they could make amendments at that point. It was really disappointing to us that the MPs voted for it not to even be sent to the Standing Committee on Health for review. And that just shows how much stigma and judgment there still is on people who use drugs.
Chris,
Okay, so
thank you.
no, it's successful in some ways. Have you done anything granular to see what approaches are more successful than others with your MPs? With our MPs?
Yeah, I think it comes down to the party politics, and unfortunately votes matter more than people's lives, and that's just the sad truth of it. The government knows, especially with the Conservatives and the Liberals, they have said that people don't want this to be treated as not a criminal, that for them to look like they're going to be soft on drugs, right? And they don't want to see like they're being soft on crime, and so they're afraid to lose those votes, and so they won't address it as a health crisis, even though a lot of Canadians have said they want it to be addressed as a health crisis, and more Canadians are calling for decriminalization and safe supply, including the police themselves. The Canadian chiefs of police have called for decriminalization. When this bill was put forward, there was endorsements by so many different organizations, respected organizations, of doctors, of nurses, of social workers, of police and law enforcement, and still they didn't listen to those voices. We really feel, Mom Stop the Harm, that the best chance we have of making changes is to share our personal stories, to humanize it, because it's easy to dismiss statistics, but when you hear about a person and you think that could have been my son or my daughter or my neighbor, these are people, these are real people, and their losses have impacts.
Yeah, okay. Frankly, it's a new concept. Well, it's not a new concept, but I haven't really focused on it before your talk. I know the Netherlands has some sort of program, and San Francisco has tried something or other, and that's the extent of my knowledge. Mm-hmm. Some program and some idea or the other,
And so the day before the government voted no to this bill, they voted in favor, granted BC an exemption. So they made a certain certain drugs legal in BC starting next January for a 3-year pilot project. And I feel it was kind of a diversion tactic for this bill, so that they could say, look, we're trying something and we're going to do this in BC and see how it works. But it was only one part of the bill. It was only doing the decriminalization part and not the safe supply part. So unless you're putting all the pieces together, it's not going to work. And you can't look at a project 3 years later and say, well, we tried it and it didn't work. Well, you only tried a tiny little portion of it. Of course, it's not going to work. Without the safe supply, we're going to continue to lose life. These people, if they get stopped by the police when they're going to purchase their drugs, they're not going to have their drugs confiscated. They're not going to be, arrested for having possession of drugs. But if those drugs are toxic, they'll go home and use those drugs and they'll still die. Right. So the safe supply really, for me, I believe is the most important part to address this issue. It's the only thing that's going to stop people from dying.
Is there a place somewhere in the world that's tried all of
Portugal?
This
Portugal. So if you research Portugal, they have been doing this with success, and it was just a comprehensive healthcare approach: decriminalization, support, treatment, safe supply, and they've had amazing results there.
Oh, okay. And this works for every kind of drug that's illegal right now, or that physicians are hesitant in Canada to prescribe for D use because it's only approved for A and B use or something.
And that's a thing too. People think that the war on drugs actually keeps us safer and keeps our community safer, but in actuality, it's the opposite. And you'll see a lot of stories in the paper about how there was a big drug bust and stuff like that. It doesn't do anything to stop the drug supply from coming in. All it does is take that amount of drugs off the street, and then they need to replace that drugs. And so then that's how the supply keeps getting more deadly all the time, because then they're mixing it with more deadly and stronger drugs all the time, and people have no idea what they're getting. And so by having a criminal approach to it is actually costing lives.
Well, I've heard that, and also it's making the drug lords rich, and the drug lords are vicious, let's say. Because I went to Mexico once and talked with local people there, and anyways, so it's bad on this from the source, and it's bad where it ends up too.
For sure. And for a lot of people like conservatives and that like to talk about dollars and fiscal responsibility, addressing this as a public health issue rather than a criminal issue is actually going to save dollars, because criminalizing drugs actually is more expensive than treating it as a health issue. The cost of policing and courts and incarceration is more expensive than giving somebody treatment and mental health support.
Well, good to know. Okay. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Susan Logie and Christine. This is actually remarkable. And I see tremendous potential moving forward, and thinking about how not only having panel discussions, but also how, and I think probably if we connect with you following up, to make donations to your wonderful program, because I think it's so key. And I think, and one final question I might ask, so let's pretend all drugs are decriminalized tomorrow. But then the next step to thinking of your talk is to help listen to people where they are and walk with them and learn what are the hills and valleys of that narrative right now. Can you, is that your sense, or?
Yes, for sure. And that's what Ryan's Hope is about. The organization we started in our son's memory and honor. We're really creating a sense of community. These are people that have been cast aside and treated like their life has no meaning or value. And we serve breakfast. We started serving breakfast in a Salvation Army parking lot during COVID. And we now we serve outside of Collier United Church every morning, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It's a partnership. We have like 5 churches involved in supporting our program. And it's a beautiful community that we have built where people come and we've become their family. Some of these people have no family and they come every morning, and sometimes they don't. It's not even about the food, because they could get food somewhere else, but they come to be accepted. And like what Ryan's friend had said, that safe harbor, And so that's what Ryan's Hope has now become for them. And that's what we need. We need to walk with people and support them. Neighbors helping neighbors, and no judgment, just human to human. You know, life is hard for all of us, and we haven't walked in their shoes. And so maybe just sit down and have a cup of coffee with someone and listen.
Thank you for being a safe harbor and continuing to encourage us to also do that. I'm going to pass it over to Susan Johnson.
Thank you, Christine, and thank you everyone for coming. I hope you can join us next week for William King. Don't be a drag, be a queen. Looking forward to it. Hope you can join us.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you, Christine.
Thanks.
Nina, we want a picture of you. Hold on. Here, you and Susan. Come on.